To the April 13th, 2016 Budget Committee meeting. And so just again, want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for attending. The first thing that I'm going to do is just take attendance. We do have 6 members present. Let the minutes reflect. We have Ms. Parker, Mr. Moore, Mr. Lassiter, I am present, Ms. Powers, and Mr. Dudley are all present. With that, everyone, we've got an agenda. I do have one revision to the agenda. Dr. Perkins has brought some information to me regarding a budget amendment that we may need to do, and that may help us in some of our determinations going further. And so I would ask us to add to the agenda, we'll call it Section A, it'll be budget amendment. And then all the subsequent Roman letters under Roman numeral 2 will be B and C. Does anybody have any objections to those changes? Does anyone have any revisions, any other revisions to the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda as revised? Okay. We got a motion by Mr. Moore. Sorry, Mr. Dudley, he jumped in front of you. And then we got a second by Ms. Powers. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, next item, we have the minutes. Everyone should have a copy of the minutes in front of them. We're trying to type as feverishly as we can to try to get these done with these meetings so back to back. So does anybody have any changes to the minutes? Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Moore. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Powers. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And let the minutes reflect I'm in favor as well. Then get that out. All right, so that motion passes. Now we're ready to move on to our new business. First item, Dr. Perkins, we're going to review this budget amendment. And maybe this is a budget amendment that you're bringing to us. It has to relate to our fund balance numbers. And maybe historically we need to back up a little bit, and maybe you can explain to the committee what it is with our fund balance, where there was a bookkeeping issue that caused us to have to do some corrections.
In the 2014-15 budget, it was a zero-based budget, so you started with a beginning fund balance of $5,500,000 and let me pull it up here so I can see it. $5,503,671.27. Since it was a zero-based budget, that would be your ending balance as well. When you're saying a zero-based budget, you're saying it was a balanced budget. Yes.
The expenditures were the same as the revenue.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes. When our financial statements were audited, the auditor gave us a audit finding because the budgeted fund balance was not close to the actual fund balance at the end of the year. So he proposed, when he presented us with the audit findings, that when we do budget, we do an amendment to adjust our fund balance, our estimated fund balance for budget, to the correct amount, to what it was actually at the end of 2014-15 year. I waited to bring it to you. He was supposed to come and see us last week, and he was sick all week. So I wanted to make sure we were all fine and that he looked over our numbers and they were accurate. So the budget amendment is for a little over $5 million. It's $5,600,000, and David has that. And all it does is it adjusts our fund balance to what it was at the end for the audited amount. And that gives us a good place to start when we're trying to budget for next year, because our numbers are going to be more accurate and reflect the accurate amounts. And all the audit finding was about was that it wasn't estimated correctly.
All right, so let me see if I can follow. So in the 14-15 budget year, that's where we had, I guess, the issue where it was a wrong number as far as what the ending budget number should have been.
Yes.
Okay.
So that reflected into your 15-16 budget and will continue to reflect into your 16-17 budget if it's not corrected.
So it's kind of like me when I'm doing my check register. If I messed up in May and if I don't correct it, it's still going to be incorrect when I get to August.
Yes,
Okay. And so you're saying to correct that error that is just, basically it's been like a domino effect as we've been going forward because of that error. It never got corrected. And what your budget amendment would do is to correct it what it should be.
yes. And it's only about the budget. It's not a reflection of our records, of our accounting records. It's only a reflection of our budget records.
Okay. And so what your budget amendment would be is to adjust the the
39,
fund balance
right.
as of June 30th, 2015.
Yes,
Now, is that to adjust the actual number or the budget number?
the actual number. Well, we'll adjust the budget number, the 5,000,005, to meet the actual number, 11,132,000, I believe it is.
Okay, and so for the start of, let's see. So for the end of, this is to correct what the fund balance would be for June 30th, 2015. So that would be the 14-15 school year then.
Yes, that would be
Okay.
the end, yes, of the 14th.
Okay.
And I put the document up that the auditor and I made the corrections on, if you'd like to see them. We weren't going to work with it next week, but if you can look, the first one, the 14-15 budget reflects that, has that 5 million. And then in 14-15, when we present that budget amendment, it's going to show that our ending fund balance is 11,132,696, which is what the actual audited balance was
Okay.
at the end of that year.
And so then when and this is prior to you coming on board, but if we had that correct number, when we passed the 15-16 budget, which we did that actually last April, I guess.
Correct.
I get confused, 15-16, and I don't know what year I'm in half the time. But so the 15-16, the current fiscal year, we passed that budget back in April of last year.
Right, and the financial statements are not audited until the next August
Right.
after you pass your budget, so.
But if we'd had the correct information at that time, or a more accurate estimate at that time, we would have then known that we actually should have budgeted a beginning fund balance of the $11.1 million figure.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
But instead, we were still relying upon the old information, and so from a bookkeeping standpoint, it just kept going forward.
Yes,
Okay. Well, I guess if anything, this is an issue to our favor, that we're now more aware of what we have available then. When we're determining the budget for this coming fiscal year, we will now have more accurate information that we can rely upon for us to make determinations of what amount we want to take out of fund balance.
yes, and it was auto-funding because it was a material amount. I mean, if we're just off by, 500, 600,000, even 800, he said, we'll be fine. But when it gets up to being a couple million, then it's not okay.
Okay. And you've actually, someone with the comptroller's office, I guess, are they with the comptroller's office, the
Yes.
auditor? Okay.
Yes.
So the state of Tennessee, the state's auditor, or the
Yes.
state's accountant, I guess, they actually came down and they assisted you going over all your books, and they assisted you with making the determination to correct what our book should be. This is what this amendment does.
Yes,
Okay. So it's not just what you've looked at, this has also been looked over by the auditor as well.
yes.
Okay.
I wanted to be sure, I wanted us to start fresh.
Right, right. Okay. Well, so with that, is there any discussion on the budget amendment that Dr. Perkins has asked us to recommend to the full board? Mr. Laster.
Just a quick question. I tried to go through and grab all the different documents and stuff today. Did you say this corrected when is out there, or
No.
it is not? Okay.
No,
Because so far I haven't been able to find the one that matches, and I've got several different ones.
Now,
So-
I just wanted the auditor to stand there with me and say, yes, that's correct, and, look it over before we presented it, so no, it's not out there yet.
And if we're going to assume a different number to start our discussion, do we need to change some of this for us to use in the process we're going through? And
Yeah,
if so,
well, maybe I can address that. And I have talked with Dr. Perkins about assuming this is what the recommendation of the committee is, to make that recommendation to the full board, that we go ahead and get corrected information for Monday. So
Yes.
that we will have that at our disposal to use. Now, she'll need to probably put an asterisk beside that number, because really it's not officially, the book is not officially changed until the full board approves that amendment. So technically, it's not official yet, but at least we know that per the auditor and per Dr. Perkins, this is the number that it should be going forward, so that hopefully then we've got some more reliable information and we can make some maybe better decisions at that time.
yeah, I was just going to ask if we're going to use that number in any kind of talks today. Can we
No,
make it so I know what I'm looking at?
yeah, I think tonight, let's hold off on any type of decisions regarding the use of fund balance until we've got that updated information in front of us. And so I would personally, I would prefer deferring all that till Monday as far as the use of any fund balance. Okay? All right, Mr. Moore.
Since I don't have that in front of me, can you clarify on the budget amendment what the change amount is? I did some math, I just want to make sure I'm.
All right, so Dr. Perkins, the budget amendment that you've prepared for me to sign at some point, if it is approved by the board, is to increase the fund balance as of June 30th, 2015, per audited numbers. You would actually increase that number by $5,629,024.73.
Correct.
Now, that's the increase. That doesn't mean
Yes.
that's what the final number is. That's the increase.
Correct, to
Correct.
the 14-15 budgeted final, ending balance, ending fund balance.
Okay. All right. So does everybody understand what we're going to be voting on is a recommendation to the full board to approve this budget amendment? Is there a motion to make that recommendation? Okay, we got a motion by Mr. Moore, a second by Mr. Dudley. Is any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, I still have some.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Dudley. Go ahead.
12 months, 16 months ago, something like that, we made some adjustments. We had some budget amendments because we were found to have given some inaccurate numbers in our presentation to the commission. Then, I guess what I'm asking is what do we need to do to assure that we have the correct numbers? Do we need to pass this and make the adjustments, then have a full financial audit to ensure that all of our numbers are accurate, or?
That's what found the deficit, was the auditor in our full audit. And the reason that it needs to be fixed is because they like you to be within 5% of what you budget. So if you budget 100,000, you need either to be at 105 or at 95. So that's why it was a finding. They want you to, they just want you to try to get as good an estimate as you can, so that you're not really overestimating, probably more than anything. So it's just to give us an accurate number to start with.
It just concerns me that it's taken, we've gone through this audit every year with the state controller's office and everything. It concerns me why it's taken this long to find this problem.
I think the audit finding was presented to us in December. I think that's when they finished the final audit. But it was suggested that there was nothing we could do until we till we started budgeting. And because it's all about the budget number, it's not about our actual records. Our actual records are correct. Our accounting records are correct, but the budgeted number was incorrect.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Perkins, of course, some of this is, I guess, inherited from maybe past practices, and maybe you're looking at these things. But going forward, do we have the right procedures in place so that something like this will never happen again?
I am doing my best to make sure I gain as much knowledge as I can. That's why I asked the auditor to please explain, probably what happened and how we can keep it from happening. And it's just making sure you keep an eye on those statements every month, and that they're reflected in the budget. When you do the budget, make sure you're coming as close as you can. Like when we went over the estimate for 15-16, our goal is to come as close as we can to what the fund balance will be at the end of 15-16, so we know where to start for the 16-17 budget. And they know that you can't be 100% accurate, but they just want you to just really think it through and really try to put as much thought into it and accuracy into it as possible. So our goal is to take those numbers when you budget and just try to project them to be as close as you can.
Well, and this may be good to go ahead and discuss. I mean, so we're addressing this one era from the 14-15 budget that will try to correct our books going forward. But looking at some of the numbers, there's also, there's some money that you're looking at that has been encumbered in the past, that's just been sitting there as being encumbered. And so are you also examining that, those things that maybe historically have been done that way, and to see whether that's correct or not?
Yes, we have, if you take a look at your balance sheets that you all get a copy of every month, they're in the liability section, or actually the fund balance section. There's both encumbrances prior year and encumbrances current year. And it just bothered me that the encumbrances prior year were not decreasing. How can we, what happened? Are they just stagnant? Are we not using that money? Let's look at them. So I got together with AP and we started looking at them, with accounts payable, sorry. And we started looking at them. They were staying on the records because they weren't being, the amounts weren't being deducted as the purchase orders were closed. So when we went over the records last month, instead of a little over $2 million, there was actually only $196,000 in open POs in prior year encumbrances. But the amount was showing on the balance sheet. So I requested with the auditor today, to please explain why that would appear that way. And it's because of the way the balance sheet has been set up for your presentation. So from here forward, we're only going to show what we actually have in prior year encumbrances, which is actually $82,000. So the fund balance is going to increase by almost $2 million.
Just because of that, not going back and following
Yes.
up as to these
Right.
open
And
purchase orders.
And that's the fund balance that is shown as an unassigned fund balance. That fund, those encumbrances, that money is there. It's just supposed to be earmarked for something. So it looked like we had $4 million earmarked for something because we had $2 million prior year and $2 million current year that was encumbered. When it, really, as we went through the year, we released, we paid some of those bills, so those funds were not encumbered anymore, but they were still showing up that way.
So the
on
information
statements.
wasn't getting updated from a bookkeeping standpoint, I guess, after so the encumbrances, that's where, maybe I've got the money in the bank, but the bill hasn't came in yet. I
Yes.
still got to pay that bill, so I need to set aside that money.
Yes.
But are you saying then, maybe the practices in the past were that the bill would get paid, but nobody was kind of, from a bookkeeping standpoint, that wasn't going up to?
Well, it wasn't from a bookkeeping standpoint.
Okay.
In the records, they're being paid. But on the documents that are presented, it was not being presented there, that they were paid. If you look at our accounts, there's a control accounts for the encumbrance, and then there's an asset and there's a liability, because it is both an asset and a liability. It's an asset because we have those funds. It's a liability because we owe those funds. And what should have been done previously was that asset and that liability, the difference between them is what should have been reported as those prior year encumbrances, and it was not. And I kept looking at it and I didn't understand why.
And this is
Why?
not something, and you're saying this is not something you were doing. You were just looking at what
I was
past
following what
practices.
has happened in the past, but
Right.
at the same time questioning why. So I had the opportunity, since the auditor was there today, please explain this to me. Why would this look like this? And he explained it, and that's when I told him I would rather be transparent. I want to show what we actually owe, not what we've owed for the whole year. So
Right.
we adjusted it, and it will be adjusted from here forward.
Well, and I guess we have to kind of keep that in mind. I mean, this is a good thing that you are asking those questions, that you're digging in and questioning maybe how practices were in the past, so that we get more accurate information. Of course, there's always going to be that situation where, everybody wants to shoot the messenger, so to speak. And so I hope that we all keep that in mind, that really this is a good thing that you are examining those things. I don't like it any more than anybody else that apparently in the past maybe we weren't getting the best information. But this is a new day. This is we're trying to fix some of these issues so that going forward we do start getting more accurate and more up-to-date information so we can make better decisions going forward. And so is your office also, are you all putting into any type of like internal controls or changing any procedures on some of these things?
Yes, and we already have a lot of procedures in place. What we're working on is a policy. We have to have a policy by June 30th, as well as federal ed, and we're working together to try, just to use the same policy. We're going to, just pull our policies together so that they can write theirs, and we're just going to use the same policy. But the
Okay.
controls we have some almost all of our controls are great. They're working. It was just about presentation.
Okay. Mr. Moore?
Well, unfortunately, you pretty much said everything I wanted to say. But I understand and I appreciate that you were able to bring this to us pretty quickly and kind of lay it out for us like this. And I know it's not easy always laying open something like this, but I think it's a good thing. And to echo what he's saying, what I'm concerned with at this point is really that we just have those policies and those procedures in place moving forward, that we know how this happened, we can make sure it doesn't happen again, and that your internal offices, and it sounds to me like this was just the report basically that came to us is where this was
Yes.
showing up.
Yes.
So that makes a lot of sense to me. I can understand that in my own line of business. I understand that can happen sometimes when you're not reconciling the actual software where the work takes place. Sounds like it was correct there. It just when it made it to the reporting that we were getting is where this shows up. So that's a good thing to know that. But I appreciate that you guys are on top of this, and maybe after June or after you have a chance to get that policy in place, maybe we could revisit a little bit of this and just
Okay,
give us a
and
rundown of
And I can add
some
into that
specifics.
policy somewhere that that it's required that our prior year encumbrances are reported at actual and not at, what they were in the beginning of the year.
Well, I guess my thinking on that is, and not to tell you guys how to do that, but maybe just this may be a good call, and there may be other areas too when it comes to the reporting. I know how as you guys take things from how you work on it and bring it to these reports that come to us, and this maybe goes beyond just this one report. Maybe there should be a once a year or twice a year time when you guys can kind of step back and make sure everything is still aligned from what's going on. Maybe that would be a good practice to add in place, just because I know things could get off. It could very easily happen to something as simple as what we allocate for gas, for fuel funding, or any other. This could happen almost anywhere in these reports, so that might be a good control to put into place.
I look, I look over the financial statements every month. And I knew that was an issue, but I wanted to wait until I could talk to the auditor because of my lack of experience in government accounting. I didn't want to do something that was normal practice. Didn't look normal to me because that's not what I teach. But,
Sure.
it might be normal practice and I may be wrong. So I tried, and the auditor has been excellent about any questions I have. So I wanted to wait till I got to talk to him and say, this doesn't look right to me. Am I correct? And
Okay.
he's been very good about helping me with anything I feel that way about.
Good. Well, thank you.
Yeah, a second set of eyes is always good, and I'm glad that the state is working with us to make sure. And at the end of the day, we just have to be as transparent as possible. And so going forward, maybe there have been some issues in the past, but this is a new day. We're turning a new page, and so hopefully going forward, we've got the good policies and the good practices in place, so that we always will be confident that we're getting good and reliable information. So, okay, thank you, Dr. Perkins. We do have a motion on the table, motion to recommend to the full board that it approve this budget amendment. Is there any more discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, so Dr. Perkins, now we're going to turn to get back into the GP budget. And when we adjourned last night, we were looking at what your office has put together as far as kind of what our beginning budget is. What do we need, regardless of, we don't add any keys, we don't do anything different. What is it that we need just to primarily maintain the status quo or what we're required to do as far as, state ratios and that sort of thing. And so I had asked you all to go back over the numbers with a fine-tooth comb, because I think there was some questions as to maybe there's some confusion and some of the key requests were in this budget, but you all have went over that, and you all have made some revisions. And so what I want us to do as a committee is have an opportunity to go over these revisions that were done so that we have a better understanding as to why these numbers have been revised. And unfortunately, the bottom line has revised up, which makes it more difficult, because if we find the available funding, if y'all's existing kind of status quo budget increases, that leaves me less money left over to spend towards Dr. Marzak's wish, or request as far as his key requests. And so let's just go ahead and go over that. I've looked at some of the lines where there were made changes, and so that's what I'm going to focus on. And then some of the other board members may have some additional questions on that. But let's just go ahead and start out with the health support line. Originally, the information we had, No. It's other student support. It's that line. Originally, I think that line was, it was going to be about, let me give you the number. 72,130. All right, so when y'all first presented this, it was that looked like our budget was potentially going to increase by 21,000, but you all have gone back over this, and now what I'm looking at actually has a reduction of about 66,000. So tell us about that. Why has that revision been made?
Yes, remember that. I'm sorry. Mr. Gaines is looking for it. We had one thing in the wrong line item, so he's looking for where we moved it to. Yeah, it was contracted services. Can we move to the 72610? Mr. Breenan is ready for that.
And I'm looking at the 72,130 line. So you all are proposing a budget of 1.8 million. Now that's actually less than what we budgeted, what we actually spent in 14-15, and it's actually less than what we're estimating that we're actually going to spend in that line. And so, if we're making a reduction, how are we making that $66,000 reduction on that?
One of the things that we looked at, carefully looked at again, was how was that money spent? And when we looked over it, we found that there was one item that needed to be moved from one line to another, and that's what Mr. Gaines is looking for, what that line item was.
All right, well, so we don't slow things down too much while he's looking for that, The next one that I noticed that there was a change is under the next line, 72-210, regular instruction program. And the information that we had originally, looks like you all were thinking that we needed to increase that by about $8,400, but now you all are saying we can reduce by about $74,000. And I'm happy as a lark if we can find savings,
sorry,
believe me, but I just want to make sure that we're, if we're doing a budget, we need to do a budget. We need to try to figure out, what is,
This is
as far as our
72,130 and
needs.
72.
If we can eliminate some cost, I am all for that.
Yes.
In 72210 last night, when we looked at the, where we did the budget definition and worksheets, we
Mr.
had.
Gaines, I think the line that I was referring to is actually 72-130
Okay.
and 72-210. 72-110 is attendance.
72, you said 72-130, right?
And 72-210. Both of those are showing decreases of about $150,000 in combination.
Yeah, the 72210, right? That's where we're looking. Originally last night, we had, when we did the original Keys budget, I told you last night, we made an effort to try to move everything that was district-related under there. What we found was that would have made a budget addition to that line of almost $1 million. There was the different software, system software pieces that we purchased, things like Myon, Interactive Achievement, all those things. What we found out, that number in there didn't add to 72210. So we took that number out, and essentially we put those purchases back in the lines where they came from. There were some purchases, and, it's just one of those things in the past. There were some things that were purchased under Office of the Principal that were system-wide support.
So, Mr. Gaines, so basically what I think, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that maybe it wasn't a reduction, it was just a moving from one line to a
That is
different line.
correct. So we
Okay.
just moved that, made those adjustments and put them back essentially where they were expended last year.
Okay. All right. Well, the next question I have is under Office of Principal. Originally, you all were thinking that we could cut about 164 out of that department, and now we're down to 75,000. So it's still a reduction, but it's not as much of a reduction as what you all were originally proposing.
That was where one of those items were moved to, from 72 to 10. One of the software items, right, Scott?
Right. One of those items that we moved out of, that money that was there, it was
Okay, I'm
moved back
following.
to 72410, 399.
So, okay, so reduction under one line, there's where my addition
Yes.
went back in potentially. Okay. And then the next line that I noticed was under 72-610, operation of the plant. And originally, you all, this is not a big difference, but originally you all were looking at increasing that budget by $238,000, and now it's gone up to $264,000. Why is that increased by about $30,000 since last night?
72-610, what we did was, did you say the amount went up? I'm sorry. I'm looking back to last night.
Yeah, the information that I had last night, you all were bringing a recommendation of 451, it was a $451,000 increase, and now it's a, hold on a second.
Yep. No,
It's
no, we're on 7260 and not
operational plan.
620.
Sorry,
It's
I get
gone
my
down,
lines a
hasn't
little
it?
bit.
Yeah, it's because we took some items that were in the keys that were listed there out, that are now just listed in the keys.
No, it's gone up. Originally, you all were saying it was going to go up 238,000. Now it's going up 264,000. So originally it was going to go up 3.8% from last year. Now it's going up to 4.2%.
Let me go back and look, because I didn't think we put anything in that when we took it out.
Is that the custodian?
No, look, we didn't change the custodian line item. Custodian line item didn't change. I know what it went up by. It was actually, the amount that went up is the janitorial services. We took the money for the mats that we proposed out of the keys and put it into this budget, the $33,000. It's actually 32,000 and.
All right, so you all have taken something from the key, and it's now in this budget.
That's
and it's
correct.
the mats. Okay, so the mats are no longer on the keys.
No.
That's right, yes,
And so,
sir.
so what we did last night is after you guys left and we sat here and worked, I looked at Sam and said, what's critical? What has to be? And one of the things he said, mats, and I said, why? And he talked about the overall cleanliness of the school and the health of students. That's critical. And so it was taken off the keys, off the maintain, and added to his budget.
Okay, I think I'm following on that. Then on the maintenance of the plant, the next line, originally it was going up 451,000. Now it's gone down to 351. So it has gone down.
Yeah, and we took out some of those things that were in the keys. Now, some of the things we took out of the keys and left here. Things like, there are none of the new positions, all of the new positions are still in the keys, but here has some of the contracts that we had, like for the train to do the automated controls contract. We're putting automated controls in all the systems, the chiller maintenance contract, and then some additional funding that we had to contract with them for help with HVAC repair. So those are the things that primarily make up that change.
And one of the things you'll see on the keys is still professional development under maintenance and operations, but you'll also see it in some of the budgets because it's training on the maintenance side, but not training on the operations side. And so the idea of the keys is to make that equal. So operations gets training as well as maintenance gets training. So that's the idea.
And then the next line that I noticed there was a change from last night is transportation, and that's the,
Yep.
let's see, so transportation was originally, you all were going to increase that budget by 119,000, and now y'all have gone up to 306. So that's the one that's breaking my heart.
In reviewing the salary line item in the original budget that had that lower amount, Dr. Perkins actually showed our transportation salary for bus drivers decreasing. And when we were going through everything with fine-tooth comb, I asked her about that, and she said, I figured it based on our current salaries, but what we discovered was there are several bus driver positions that are in the budget that are unfilled positions. So when she went and looked at our actual employees and their salaries, there's several that, and I think Mr. Perriman has shared with you before that we're trying to hire bus drivers as quickly as we can. We actually hired a couple this week. So we constantly have positions. So those were open bus driver positions. Did we decide, wasn't that, how many bus driver positions was that we put in? Yeah, I think it was 10 bus driver positions that we put in.
5 for the open and 5 for the new route.
Right, that is correct. Yeah, because we didn't have the 5 routes that we've just added for the 5 buses we bought, plus we had 5 positions that were currently unfilled. So we felt like we needed to make sure that we budgeted for the same number of bus drivers next year that we have this year.
And you're still going to see 3 on the keys because those are still the temporary routes. So we can continue to run the temporary routes. or we can fund it through the keys and full-time those 3 temp routes.
All right, so I'm somewhat following that we're saying we're putting new buses online. We're going to have to get some new positions for that. That makes a lot of sense to me. We had some positions were not being filled, but I'm still struggling with this one because I go back to 14, 15, and you all spent $4 million that year. And this year, we're estimating we're going to spend $3.6 million. But if I look at the 14, 15 year, so if I spent $4 million, you all are wanting to really increase, that's $700,000 more. And I guess I'm trying to figure out how many new positions we're
Well,
adding there.
Now, again, last night you were already showing an increase. The increase wasn't for positions. The amount that we were showing previously was an increase in the transportation budget of, let me make sure I'm looking at the right one because I got several spreadsheets open. We were looking at transportation increase. No, was it showing a decrease? I'm sorry, I may be looking at that wrong. I'm looking at the
Yeah,
wrong one.
actually, yeah, so
Yeah, I'm looking
originally,
at an old-
yesterday.
I'm looking at an old one.
Yeah, transportation originally was going to go down 119,000, and now it's going to go up, and that's a big swing.
But
That's
let-
almost a $400,000
Let me get to the
swing.
right one.
This was the original.
306. But the only thing we added last night was positions.
Can we get back to the work?
increased for fuel and tubes and other things like that.
Yeah, we do have increase in there, but those were in there previously. We didn't add anything last night but positions.
Can you go into the workbook?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't really compute for me. I mean,
Yeah.
about how much are so how many new positions are we talking about total?
We're talking about only 5 new positions for the
And
5
about how
buses.
much per position?
We figured the amount for a position was $20,000, so that's $100,000. This workbook you talking about? This is the one we did last night.
And so that's where I'm struggling.
Yeah, and then also in there, we have, if I can get to the right workbook here, there is an increase in the maintenance of the buses because we're adding 5 new buses. There's an increase for fuel of the buses. Also, Mr. Pearman, he increased the tires, and instead of just looking at adding tires for 5 more buses, he went back and looked at, based on the recommendation of when you should replace the tires and how many tires that figures to be bought. So we're actually increasing he proposed an increase of tires and tubes budget going from $111,000 to $157,000. Diesel fuel budget went from $660,000 to $686,400. That is strictly based on the 5 additional bus routes. Yes. The tires and tubes. Also, he broke out before we had $247,700 for other contracted services. That line has dropped to $64,000, but actually, we've added a line in called maintenance and repair of vehicles, which is at $292,410, and that is based on looking at what we're currently spending with the central maintenance department. He took the monthly average of what they charge us for the repair of our buses, and that's how he came up with that budget. And the $64,000 are the other things he has, like the Versatrans system and some other contracted services. So this is all the budget he submitted based on what he felt like were our actual costs that we needed to be budgeting for next year.
And again, I guess I struggle.
Oh, we also went
Yeah.
up a little bit on insurance as well.
But I see, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Breeden. I mean, I'm following you, that it sounds like there's going to be some increased expenditures on that are warranted, new bus drivers. insurance, things like that. But I'm going from, in 14, 15,
I may be looking at the wrong line, yeah.
Mr. Breeden, I'm looking at, between 14, 15, the actual amount spent was $4 million. And you all are asking to budget for the 16, 17 year another $700,000. And I just can't, I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I hear maybe $100,000 or $200,000 of, some changes, but I'm struggling getting up to that number. And I noticed that our amended budget right now for transportation is $4.3 million, and we're estimating that our transportation department is going to spend $3.6 million. So they're under budget, and that's a good thing. I mean, I like to keep the actuals down, but maybe they're not utilizing the funds.
I
that
wasn't
they do.
involved in that estimate of actual. I don't know where that number came from, so I can't speak to that. I know we are estimating saving about $250,000 in fuel costs this year because of the reducing in costs, but I didn't come up with that other number, so I can't speak to that.
Okay.
I don't know where that came from. I am not under the understanding we're going to come in that far under budget.
Well, let's, I can go back and look at the last financials. It may help us.
Because some of the things you look at, like for instance, tires and tubes, we don't buy those month to month. What we do is we wait till the end of the year. We take all the budget money we have left over. We buy a stock of tires and tubes, and we store those at the central maintenance department. And so we'll spend $100,000 plus on tires and tubes in May or June. I don't know if that was accounted for in that estimate.
Well, I'm looking at the last financials for February that we have, and that department, or that line item is spent through February about $2.4 million. And so it's under budgeted because February is 2/3 of the year through, and it's only spent about 62% of its budget. So it's under budget. Now, I don't know, maybe there's some expenditures that come in that maybe
Yes, sir,
why
that's
that
what I'm telling
number's
you. A
down.
lot of them, they're not a month-to-month expenditure.
Right.
So you can't take how much we spent in February, divide that by however many months that is, 8 months, and multiply it times 12. That is not an accurate reflection of how you could estimate what we're going to spend. What you would need to do is look at historical spending to see that during those last couple of months, there's a lot of stuff that's bought for the coming year. Tires and tubes. We spend several $1,000s. Basically, what we've been doing is we've been waiting until the end of the year, see how much money we got left, and we buy up tires and tubes. So we will spend quite a bit of money on tires and tubes.
When did y'all generally do that?
That's usually done in May or June.
In May or June?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then, in addition to that, of course, at that point, we had a lot of fuel savings, which we've since committed. At that point, we had not bought the new Versatrans system, so we're spending some of the fuel savings on that. So that's also going to drive up the rest of the year on that budget because we're spending $180,000 on that. We also took $50,000 out of those tires and tubes to pay toward these new buses, 5 new buses that we're buying. So I would suspect we're probably going to spend a lot more than $3.6 million.
Well, what if,
Yeah, one other thing Mr. Gaines mentioned to me is, we've seen an increase in field trips and those kind of things. And typically, the accounting process that we've used, and we've talked about this, is there's money collected for field trips, but it has not gone back into this budget. It's been just used as, what kind of income do we call that, Dr. Perkins? I can't remember. Miscellaneous
Right.
income, so it goes back
Right.
into the budget.
But
So he's trying to
let me also-
anticipate some of those.
let me also ask you, as far as our fuel savings, is that going to get, is that under that line item? Is that where the fuel savings?
Fuel savings
occur?
are in the transportation line item.
So, in some ways, I would, I understand what you're saying, the new hires, but historically, we have to buy tires and stuff like that every year. And I'm looking at the historical numbers. I'm not seeing the justification for myself for that much of an increase. So I'm struggling a little bit on that.
And I would say that the best thing would probably have Mr. Perryman, because he put this budget together. He went over the reasons that we needed those with me. And And the things that he talked about, he could probably better adequately explain that than I could. But all of these, he did increase some requests. And part of that is a new person going in. There's a lot of things we've talked about on the care and maintenance of our buses that he would like to see us improve, and so I think he added that to the budget.
Okay. Well, just, I mean, the one thing, I guess, those three line items are adding about almost $1 million to our, if we look at the operation of the plant, the maintenance of the plant, and transportation is adding about $1 million. And I struggle with that because that's taking $1 million away from things that I want to be able to spend on academics. And so,
And I understand, let me just say one thing, Mr. Chairman, and I don't mean to be, but I was told y'all wanted to have the best facilities in the state. We wanted to have the best school facilities anywhere. Well, we saw in the presentation a few weeks ago that we spend on average about $1 million less than we should on maintenance. Those two equate. They just equate. Now, I understand that's money that's taken away from classrooms,
Yeah.
but you got to get it somewhere. So that's your all's decision. We can certainly continue to operate like we have, and we will do whatever you all instruct us to do. As far as, we'll budget with what money you provide, but we will operate as we have if we stay with the funding that we've had.
I understand. I
Okay,
understand.
so I'll just say
Okay.
that.
All right, so I think that's the items that I noticed there had been some differences from last night. And so what I'm going to do is open the floor and see if any of the other members have any questions themselves. So, Mr. Laster.
Under transportation, where do our other vehicles fall under? Do they fall under transportation as well?
All of the vehicles except the maintenance department vehicles, they're actually accounted for in the maintenance budget.
And I feel like I'm almost giving up my favorite swimming hole here,
Okay.
but we at the Northfield facility, they have, and forgive me because I forget what do they call the automotive? You remember?
Tech.
Yeah, they have the automotive tech there, and I have seen before that for a while anyway, I don't know if they're still doing it, they were doing oil changes for, I think, Spring Hill, either the water system or whatever. Is there any reason that we can't utilize them for a lot of our, especially our simple, neat needs? They may not be able to accommodate buses. That, I don't know. That would have to, but, these people are students, not just high school students. There's adults. They're going to get certifications to go work in a dealership. They have instructors. And the best part is that if you bring in the parts, then they'll take care of your vehicle for next to nothing. So, we could, and I know that oil changes are not going to be a huge hitter for us, that kind of thing, but, there could be a lot of things that if that's allowable, we could shift that over, and then we're not only supplying, training to students, but also cutting some pennies here and there as well.
And I will tell you that the agreement that has been in place, and again, it was here when we got here, is everything runs through the county's central maintenance department for maintenance of all of our vehicles. We basically pay what they charge. There's no, if the rate was negotiated, it was negotiated long before I got here. So we may, and I, would gladly go out and look for other alternatives, possibly that, or even if that is not an option, consider bidding at least the maintenance of fleet vehicles. I don't know that there's anybody else in town who could maintain buses, but we could certainly, there's all kinds of oil change tire places around town, but I hadn't thought about that one, quite frankly, and that might be a great option. What we want to do, again, is take the best care we can of the buses, of the vehicles and the buses, so that is an option. We can do that.
And of course, this comes down to the problem we all have. It's just so many needs, and so some of it's a difficult decision, it's almost like trying to decide which child do I feed, I mean, it's tough, it's a predicament. But, I'm looking at the big picture here. So if we look at just those three lines, I'm up to about 900,000, almost a million more than what we budgeted last year. Okay? And I understand that we need to make some improvements, and I'm all about making those improvements. And I think probably when we start looking at some of our fund balance going forward, we may be able to start also doing some things there. But I understand a lot of this is personnel costs, that sort of thing, that has to be dealt with in the operating budget. But, Mr. Breeden, I'm going to be bold.
Okay.
You've got me down. I was hoping to be able to fund about $1.5 million to the director for the key requests. And some of those, I think, are maintenance. There's a lot of maintenance things on there, on those key requests. And I was hoping for using our revenue projections, if the committee ends up agreeing with those projections, that would have left over. I was hoping to have at least about 1.5 for the director to be able to use for some of these reoccurring key requests. So what if I propose that you all go back to those three line items, and can you squeeze out $300,000 for me? Because right now you're just leaving me with about 1.2. And so could you go back? I know we want to do this, we want to do that, but maybe make some, wise decisions to try to prioritize some of that spending and maybe get that number down. If you could find about $300,000, that would allow us to then have about $1.5 million for the director. So again, I'm just thinking out loud and just wondering if that may be possible to ask those those departments or whatever to do that.
We can do that. I mean, we'll need to walk through it. I will need to walk through this with our staff. I obviously on the transportation need Mr. Perryman's input, and on the maintenance operation need Mr. Hall and Murray Ring's input, because they've
that's
input on this.
and that's still that's no cutting.
Right.
That's actually an improvement of about $600,000 more dollars for you all to be able to try to use towards making some improvements in maintenance and transportation and those items. But that would help us to, because right now, I mean, again, this is the difficult dilemma, but right now, we're almost on par. I mean, we're saying, we're going to spend another $900,000 towards those line items, but then there's only going to be about 1.2 for the whole district as far as academic needs. And so I would like to maybe, I understand both needs, but I'd like to kind of change that ratio just a little bit to where maybe we can put about 1.5 into going towards academic needs and try to make some reductions in that.
I think we may be able to find 300,000 in one-time costs in either one of those three items that we may be able to take care of on Monday. So we can sit down tomorrow and scour his budget, and I'm confident we can find 300,000 in one-time costs. Confident.
Mr. Moore.
Maybe it was explained and I don't get it. I'm still comparing to the spreadsheet, and this is from line 72, 710. I'm still, and maybe Mom got the wrong report, but the report we got last night had a savings of 119,000, and that's gone up to there's an increase of 306. That's $425,000 swing, and I'm still not understanding how that happened overnight. Or am I looking at something incorrectly?
And I don't know how that happened either, except that I do know that now, this year we have in the bus driver salary line item, $1,637,395. And that has been increased to $1,737,395, which is $100,000 for those 5 additional bus driver positions. That's the only line item we touched last night. So
Well, then
I don't know what the
somehow
amount that
between
was
last
in.
night and today, there's another $325,000.
I don't know if it was
change.
in that, I don't know if we were reduced that much in that bus driver line item before, that it had dropped 300,000 below the 163. But all I know is last night we had discussion, and I told Dr. Perkins, I knew she had a reduction in the bus driver salary line, and I said, we have not gotten rid of any bus driver positions.
Well, since nobody
And
seems to
we've-
know where $325,000 came from, perhaps this would be a good way to find the majority of what Chairman Bates is looking for. I mean, I just don't understand. I know you guys are saying that's all you changed last night, but obviously something else changed in a big way. Maybe you guys can look at that one more time and figure out what the difference is.
The only thing I could possibly think of is we adjourned last night because we found some discrepancies through. We fixed discrepancies. We went through every single budget workbook and fixed every single discrepancy. So in transportation, there might have been a calculation discrepancy, which we fixed. We fixed everything. Because what I'm showing at the bottom of the budget workbook, with all of the salaries fixed, clerical personnel, longevity, communications, operating, postage, everything, our final number is 4701505, which is what you see up there. Which means a budgeted difference of about 306,194.
Okay. I will say one more thing while I'm sitting here. If we could possibly, for Monday evening, can we make sure we get some electronic versions too that are up to date, that come out to us?
Budget workbook, GP budget format,
Whatever
keys,
we're working on.
all three.
Yes.
We'll get all three for you.
And can
They
you
will be
date them
current and
as of that date,
updated.
so I know which version I'm looking at?
The
Yes.
ones that we did last night are on the SharePoint site, so
Okay.
did you see those? They were put on the SharePoint site
I'm
last
not
night.
seeing the ones on,
They're in a,
Gotta go under,
there's a folder called 2016 Budget Docs. And the only we moved everything into a folder that said, what did we call that folder? So that the only documents that are in that folder are the ones that were changed last evening. I know we did that last night. It's called 2016 Budget
Let's,
Docs.
going forward, so we don't get confused, every time we save a new version, let's put in parentheses the date of that version so that we can easily go
Yeah.
back. And the other thing, my suggestion, I'm going to suggest it again, everything on the website, everything on SharePoint needs to have in watermark draft. It's all drafts. There's nothing final until the committee recommends it. So we just want to make sure that that's emphasized going forward, that this is all draft. But, all right, so let's take about a 5-minute recess, and we'll come back at 7:45.
can you do me a favor on the regular, the general purpose worksheet? Hey, are we gonna wait for Joanna?
Oh, she's not back?
All right, while she's gone.
All right, look. Now he's.
Never gonna miss another one now.
You ready to go another 2 hours now?
Let's have at it.
Let's do it. All right, so we're going to go back on the record so we can go ahead and see where we want to finish up tonight. Before we move on, just real quick, we've gone over these expenditures and some of the revisions. Does any committee member have any additional questions regarding those expenditures before we start doing some discussions about what we want to do going forward? Mr. Moore.
Just since we're back in place, I know I'm talking to the director and the budget director that they are going to look at that line item and just double check, because there was such a large change, that they are just going to double check that and make sure it's correct.
Anything else from anyone? All right, so what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to hit you all with a suggestion, and we could get some discussion going. What my suggestion is that we recommend, or maybe, and this is probably going to be something to come back on Monday so that we can take a look at it on Monday. But what my suggestion is going to be is that we use the revenue figure in this sheet that everybody has, the paper in front of them, so they can look at it. That would, actually, we would budget revenue of 88.3 million. Does everybody see that number? So that would be our budgeted revenue. That would actually, yeah, we see where the increases would come from. One of the increases would be to come from local taxes, an increase to 36,052,000. And that number is based upon what we went over yesterday with Dr. Birkins, the historical information as to, really, that's the number, what we're expecting to get this year, okay? That's not asking for any type of growth revenue, which I could argue that actually you would, if you wanted to be accurate, we would add 3% to that number at least. But if we just assume that the economy just flatlines, which we have really not a lot of historical data to suggest that, but if we just assume that the economy flatlined and we left and we budgeted for this coming fiscal year, what we're expecting is actually going to hit the bank this year, okay? So does everybody follow me so far? That's where we get the $88.3 million figure to budget for revenue. That would bring us down to the expenditures. Now, we just went over that, unfortunately, some of these expenditures under the existing budget has increased, but we just went over the possibility, and what my recommendation, what my suggestion is going to be is that you all find $300,000 to cut out of that. And I don't really even care what line it gets cut out of, but I want you all to go back and make some decisions of, let's try to prioritize. I do think that those transportation and maintenance numbers appear to be high to me, and I would like for you all to take a very good, hard look at that, to reduce that by about $300,000 to get us to total available funds left over of the $1.5 million. And so what my suggestion is that what we ultimately would recommend to the full board is that we've increased enough budgeted revenue so that we can fund 1.5 million of the director's key requests that are of a reoccurring nature. And what my suggestion would be is then we tell the director and his team to go back and look at those key requests and make some determinations of what is the most critical that we need at right now. You know, what is priority one? Because this is a long-term commitment that we're making. But what do we need right now that you can go through your reoccurring key requests and say, okay, I've identified the 1.5 million that this is where I would utilize that, and then come back to us on Monday with a list of showing what you've basically it'd be kind of a maybe another column. This is what I'm putting in the 1.5. This is what I had to take out because of that. And so we can see that, you know, in black and white of that's what we would have to leave behind, so to speak. And so that would be my suggestion that the committee make that recommendation so that the director can come back and present that to us on Monday. And then maybe we can go ahead and recommend that to the full board for approval as far as our GP budget. Now, I'm not totally done with the GP or the key requests. Part of my suggestion, too, would be to come back on Monday as we get the revised fund balance numbers and we'll have more accurate information, and to then also go back to the director's key requests that are of a one-time nature. And he's already identified about 1.8 or something like that?
Yes, sir, it's about 1.812.
Okay. So he's already identified some things that are of a reoccurring nature, and what I would like for us to do on Monday is to, once we have that fund balance numbers, to see what we're comfortable of taking out of our fund balance to fund those one-time expenditures on the director's key requests. We may be comfortable with these new numbers of saying, hey, let's go ahead and fund the full amount that are one-time expenditures. Or we may say we're going to fund 1.5 and we want the director to go back and, do some cuts out of that. But that would get us about $3 million towards the director's key request total, from about 1.5 from fund balance, and then this number if we use these revenue numbers. And what I would suggest, if the committee is good with this suggestion, what I would suggest is when the director is going back to do the cuts, that he actually look towards an eye of, if you're going to leave something off, look at, is there something that if we get additional state funding, we may be able to utilize that state funding to go back to that list maybe at a later time.
Yes.
And so maybe with an eye towards that. And then also with an eye towards, you've heard a lot from the committee members.
What's that? Okay, it's Brenda's. Never mind. Go ahead.
Somebody's angry about something being cut, so already vandalizing the cars out there. All right, so anyway, I would ask the director, for me personally, I do not want to micromanage. I'm not the guru. I don't know where is the best ways of utilizing that fund. So for me, I'm more deferential to let the director and his team make that determination, if that's what the committee so chooses to do. I would, though, ask the director to take into consideration, you've heard some input from the committee members where they've told you, look, maybe I'm a little bit wary of this expense, but this is where it seems to be a little bit more critical. At least take us into consideration in your review of that with your team. But at the end of the day, I don't want to micromanage that. I want you to feel free from a professional, objective standpoint to be as objective as possible.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, not a problem. We can do that.
Okay. And so that would, so ultimately the real question is that something, acceptable to this committee? Does that seem like a plausible way of going forward? And so I want to get some input, because if somebody has some comfort, look, under this scenario, this is asking to a request to increase our local funding. I mean, it is what it is. I think it's sound. I think there's a good basis for it. My concern is going above that number. You're getting into an area where you may not be just looking at money that's going to come in regardless and just letting us, and that's at the end of the day, what my suggestion is this is actual money coming in. Let us use the actual money that's coming in.
Yeah.
We're not asking you to increase rates. We're not asking for any of that. Just let us use it so that we can further some of these issues that we've identified. I do feel like if we go beyond that number, we're getting into an area where you're potentially dealing with rates. And that's a whole, and the committee may be okay with that. But I just want the committee to be aware you're getting into then that area where that's a whole nother universe, a whole nother discussion. So that's where I'm looking at this from a conservative standpoint of what I think I can make a good case if we go to the commission. I believe I can make that argument. I believe I've got the facts to back me up. So I feel comfortable with that. So with that, I want to get input of the members for you all to give me some guidance on that. Mr. Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think I'm comfortable with those numbers as well. I know we've spent with the Facilities Committee quite a bit of time over the last few months really hyper-focusing on the issues on that side. And I think these are reasonable requests, what we're looking to do here and what to apply to these keys that are shifting the direction back towards the academic side. That it's kind of gotten lost in our discussion as of the last few months. But I'm glad to see this, and I think the numbers you're using that you propose here, the 1.5 million, again, it's money that's already coming in. It's based on the historical data, is safe to assume that that's not going to be disrupted even in a bad year. I know we've historically had one or two, one actually there, you're right. And even then it would have been a safe number at that point. So I think that's reasonable to ask for. And again, I agree with you that it's this is not just asking for dollars. We have very specific things we're looking to spend this on, and I think it's definitely documented here. So I'm comfortable with that. I'm not sure what everyone else is, but I definitely am.
Mr. Dudley.
Thank you. Along with Mr. Moore, I'm comfortable, but I want us. I think this allows us to work on academics, but it also allows us to work on our building and maintenance needs. I don't want to see maintenance and then facility needs put on the back burner.
No, sir.
And in the past, that's where a lot of the cuts were budget-wise was made. Let's just defer the maintenance and we'll get to it when we get there. Well, that's the reason we're in the boat we're in. Yeah. We've got to improve our facilities and take care of them. If we can just find a balance, so I'm happy right now.
Ms. Parker.
I too am comfortable with the suggestion. I would just say that as we're looking to central office for suggestions, I know one of the things that you've said along the way is that these things are going to be scorecarded. So as you're thinking about what you want us to fund on this first round, maybe think about how that is going to show up on the scorecard. Because, like I said, on the AP stuff, I'm still curious as to how we're going to track AP if we're not making everybody take the test. And I think that could come up with some of the other ones. The RTI teachers, what are we going to be able to look at? And if you can give us I know you don't have to have it all mapped out, but if you could give us some insight, I think that would help us to know which way to fund.
RTI is actually easy because we do Ames web testing.
Okay.
And so what we'd be able to do is those kids that the RTI teacher works with, we test them at the beginning, and then we test them at the end. And we see the impact of that person working with them. The idea is that they should go to tier 3 to tier 2, tier 2 to tier 1, tier 1. Well, they say tier 1. There is no tier 0. So we'll be able to quantify. There's nothing on this list that cannot be quantified in some form or fashion. So, Yeah, I've told Teresa McClure, get your rest. Because the minute you guys approve something, her job accelerates to 100 miles an hour. So she's getting her rest.
All right, so any more input on that? All right, so I'm gonna make a formal motion that we make a tentative, this is a tentative recommendation, okay? That we tentatively recommend revenue budget on the GP of $88,372,580 as reflected on the last general fund budget draft that we received today on April 13th. And that would include a increase of local revenue to $36,052,562 as reflected on the worksheet. All right, so that's number one. The second recommendation would be to reduce our base expenses on this current worksheet so that there is actually available money left over to fund key requests in the amount of $1,500,000. That's number two.
Can we say that to at least $1,500,000?
Yeah, let me revise that to at least $1,500,000.
Thank you.
And to request that the director and his office review their base expenditures to be able to find those reductions. The third recommendation would be for the director to then go back with his team to analyze his key requests and to reduce those requests to that number that's left over of at least $1.5 million. And to bring that list of recommendations back to the committee on Monday for further review. And that list would also give us another column or list that would allow the committee to be able to review what is not going to be funded. And to clarify, the recommendation, the $1.5 million, is for reoccurring cost under the key request. And then the fifth recommendation would be for the committee to then review the one-time expenditures of the director's key request, to review that and to potentially fund some of those one-time requests from fund balance based upon the updated information that Dr. Perkins will be bringing to us prior to Monday. And so that's my motion to make that recommendation on behalf of the committee. Is there a second? Okay, we have a second by Ms. Powers. Is there any discussion on the motion? What did I say? Oh, and I even wrote down Powers too. It's getting late, I'm sorry. All right, Ms. Parker. Ms. Parker has seconded. Okay. All right, any discussion on the motion?
Okay,
Yes, Mr. Lassiter.
real quick, just to make sure that I'm looking at the right document. So our total budget overage is a little over $5,700,000.
You talking about here?
Yes.
Of that,
Okay.
3907 is recurring and 1812 is.
Okay, and we're looking to come up with 1.5 to take care of recurring.
Yes, sir.
Of the 5.7, what of that number is reoccurring? That's where the 1.5 would go towards.
Yes.
Okay, so that's still gonna leave, so that one, we're gonna try to come up, and then also do the one-time, because the one-time cost is a little more than 1.5.
Yes.
It's, you see right there, it's
Right,
1.8.
yeah,
Now that-
1.8.
Now, everybody understand, that 1.8 is part of that 5.7.
Right.
Okay,
right.
I just
So I'm
want to make
looking
sure I
at these
understand.
two, I'm looking at the recurring cost and the one-time cost.
Yes,
So even if they do come up with, you know, a 1.5 million to look at one time, that still is
Yeah.
not gonna cover everything that's on here.
And what we'll also do is we'll also look at some of these things up here that may have been classified as recurring and see if we can move those down to one-time costs to kind of shift some of those things. For example, a summer work crew at $15,500. That could be a one-time cost. And then we look at next year, do we do it again? So there will be some things in here that we'll look at reclassification to try to adjust some of those figures from where they originally were, and we'll have that ready for Monday.
And again, Mr. Lasser, the motion is, this is a tentative
Well,
recommendation.
I just want to
so,
make sure I'm
yeah.
looking at the right numbers. So under the funded column, if it's not too much to ask, under the funded column, how right now we have everything underfunded, whether it's under the funded column, whether it's reoccurring or one time.
Yeah.
Can we split those so that I can look at the columns and say, here's what you want to fund that's one time, here's what you want to fund that's reoccurring?
So what I will do with this column that says funded, I'll rename this recommended to be funded round one, and then you'll see a fourth column that's left to be funded.
Okay, what
I think he's wanting to
personally
see.
has suggested is split funded into reoccurring funded and one-time funded.
Just like it is down here
So
at the
that,
bottom.
For example, by item. So you say the work crew, summer work crew, if that's a one-time expenditure, it would be in the funded one-time expenditure column, not in a reoccurring. If, something that we're, instructional coach for Spring Hill Elementary would be reoccurring,
Right.
for example.
Right, so just take the orange column and split it in two. Some
Okay.
things will be over on the one-timer, some things will be on the reoccurring.
How about if I found a way to color code them so that recurring could be red, one time could be blue? What if I were to color code it so you could tell? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
That'll work. The only reason I was thinking the other is if we make changes,
Yeah.
it'll change our numbers real easy next to each other.
I'm trying my best to keep it all on one page so you don't have to scroll left and right.
And I
That's
tell
what I'm
you
trying
what,
to do.
would it be better for Monday,
Yeah.
since the committee did not move anything from the gray or the yellow column, of just, for now, let's drop those columns so that we're just focusing on what's in the orange at
Sure.
this point?
I can create a new sheet, save this as Keys Budget Draft 1, Keys Budget Draft 2. I can do that, yeah, so we
And
can
that
go
way,
back to it eventually.
everything is, we're down to the nitty-gritty items now.
Yes, I could, yeah,
If I have it in Excel, I can do it at whatever I choose.
yeah,
Okay.
you got it.
All right, so.
Yes, I can.
We do have a motion on the table. It has been seconded. Any more discussion on the motion? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, with that, we have completed the business of this committee meeting, and so we will be adjourned until our next Budget Committee meeting, when we will take up this GP to finish up, but we will also start taking up some of Mr. Moore's bigger list, by the way. We've been fretting over the director's list. Wait till we get Mr. Moore's list. So we'll start delving into that at that time. So, but and then also as a reminder, we do have a facilities committee meeting tomorrow, where there's going to be some pretty important work that's going to be putting in developing our 5-year capital plan. Correct, Mr. Breeden?
That's correct.
Okay. And I would suggest, you all may already discussed this, but if y'all can clear that calendar as much as possible as far as that docket for tomorrow, as far as reports and things like that, to try to whittle down where we can focus as much time on that 5-year plan, that would be great. So, because it's a lot to.
The agenda's already been set
Yeah.
for tomorrow night, but we will certainly we'll try to summarize everything else as much as
Yeah,
possible.
maybe if anybody's doing any presentations of another nature, maybe they just need to get the memo to, let's keep it concise, because we could be here for a while just putting together that capital plan, so. Okay. All right, so with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Ms. Martin. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Powers. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, so we'll put down Mr. Moore as being opposed again, so. Oh, did she? Motion carries. We are adjourned. What are you posting tonight? We're done.